Use case 19. Whenever a new task is assigned to a contact, increment the number of tasks associated field value by 1. So what we have here is we have a field that is on the contact object, and this field is called number of tasks associated. Right now, every time you create a new task and that task is kind of associated or assigned to a contact, or rather related to a contact, we would increment the count of the number of tasks on the parent contact account by 1. Right, so let's say there are 3 tasks assigned to contact 1, so the number of tasks associated should be 3, but as soon as we create the 4th task, the number should increment to 4. Right, so that's our use case. What object should we write our trigger on? This should be on the task object. Why? Because we are tracking whenever the task is being assigned, right? So this would be whenever the task is created, right? So the event would be insert, and whether would you want to go for the before event or the after event, it should be after event, because after the task has been assigned and it is actually been created in the system is when you want to increment the number, right? So let's go into Salesforce and let's try to achieve this. So I'll go to developer console. Before heading there, let's go to object manager and let's create our field, right? So I'll go to contact and I'll create a new field that's called number of tasks associated. Right, so we have our field created, right? Number of tasks associated. Let's now jump into the developer console and let's create a task trigger. Let's quickly check if we have a task trigger already. We do, right? So let's open this trigger right here, and this is on before insert. We want to write a new event that is called after insert. So if trigger dot is after and if trigger dot is insert. Right, and I would be using task trigger handler here. And after insert, I'll pass on the trigger dot new variable. Go ahead and create the task trigger handler. I'll create a new Apex class, and now let's save this file. I'll define the method because or else it will throw an error, and I'll expect list of task records, right? So list of task records. Save. Let's save the handler first and then save the trigger. That should resolve the errors. Cool. Now let's go ahead and start doing what we need to do. So let's take a look at the use case again. So whenever a task is assigned to a contact, increment the number of task associated field value by 1. So we need to fetch the contact information on the task that's been created, right? So let's take a look at the task object and see which field is that. Let's say open. So we have the what ID and the who ID, right? And then I believe we also have something that's assigned ID, right? Let's take a look if we have assigned ID, or rather let's open a task record. Let's see how it looks like. So let's take a look at this particular record. So the name can be either contacts or leads. So basically this is your who ID, right? It is not your what ID. Let's quickly query it out just to be sure. So I'll say select what ID comma who ID from task, and let's say execute. So we see a list of records. These are task records, and if we notice, this says 001 or 006, right? And this is 003. If I take this ID right here from the who ID and I paste it here, I should see that this is a contact record, right? Let's take a look. Let's see if that's true. It says it is not a valid URL. Let me go ahead and go to tasks again. Now let's open a contact record, and now let me just replace this value here and say enter. So ideally contact record ID start with 003. That's how I figured basically that it's a contact record. So they start with 003 and account start with 001. The first 3 identifiers are the object identifiers. So if you see, this is user 1, and I believe there should be a task. This task is associated here, right? So we need to fetch the who ID information, and then whichever contact this is, we'll have to increment that value to 1, right? So let's go into the task trigger handler and let's say for each task record in task records list, I'll say contact ID list dot add task rec dot who ID. Now there's an important thing to consider. This who ID will not always be a contact record. Why? Because this could also be a lead record, right? You saw that we can have this reference that can either be a contact or a lead. The who ID can be a contact or a lead. So we'll have to segregate. Here we'll have to put a if check and say if task rec dot who id, right? And I want to check if it starts with, or rather contains, right? If it contains the keyword 003, I can say that, yeah, okay, this is basically a contact ID and it is not a lead ID. Only then I can come in and say add it to the contact list, or else I'll get a mismatch exception, right? Let's try to do this, and let's say save. I'll have to define the contact ID list. I'll do that right here. List of ID, contact ID list equals new list of ID, save. Let's see if this saves up fine. This saved up fine, but this is saying that contains might not be applicable here. So let's see, this is saying contains from the type ID will not work, right? So I have to find a way to convert this who ID, which is of type data type ID, into a string and then check the contains. So what I can do is I can say string dot value of, this is a method that I get, and I can convert this stuff to string. And now if I say save, taskRec.whoID is of data type ID, and this can be converted into a string literal by using this particular function from the string class. Okay, and I'll say dot contain 003. I'll quickly check if I can say instead of contains, can I say starts with? Let me say string functions in Apex. Okay, why am I checking this? Because it might be that 003 can come somewhere in between also, right? But I want to check specifically whether the record ID starts with this particular keyword or not. Only then I can judge that this is a contact record, not a lead record, right? So let's see if I have starts with option also. So I'll open the reference guide and I'll take a look at all the functions. So I'll just quickly do a command F. So you see I have starts with option available, right? And this is, it will return true if the string that called the method begins with the specified prefix. So instead of contains, I'll say starts with, and I'll say save. This should also save a fine because this is also a string function. Okay, so now this is certain that only when the task assigned, or rather the who ID is a contact record, is when I'll be adding this information to the contact ID list. Cool. So far so good. Now I have the list of contact IDs. I want to query them out. I want to get the information. So I'll say con records equals select ID comma number of tasks associated. I need this field to increment, right? So I have to query it from contact. Now which contacts do I fetch? I fetch only the contacts where ID in contact ID list. So I'll fetch only the contacts that are currently relevant, not all of them. I'll say save. Let's see if this saves up fine. Yep. So I have all the contact records here. Okay. And before going further, I think I might need a map to associate which task is associated to what contact for bulkification, right? Okay, let me wait. When it happens, I'll show you why I need a map. Okay, that will make it more clear. So now what I'll do is I'll say for each contact record, for each con in con records, I want to say con dot number of tasks associated equal to +1. Looks good. So what I've done is I've basically incremented the value to 1. But now here comes an interesting thing. What if this is the first task that is being entered for the contact? That means currently this particular field holds the value null. So con dot number of tasks associated will evaluate to null, and you might get a null pointer exception. So in that case, we can put a null check. We'll say if con dot number of tasks associated is not equal to null, only then increment it by 1. Okay, only then use the current value and increment it to 1. But what if it is the first value? In that case, we'll simply say con dot number of tasks associated is equal to 1. Why? Because this is the very first task that's coming up for this particular contact. Does that make sense? You can take a look at this again, pause the video and just take a look at this for loop, take a look at what we have queried, and this should make sense. Okay, let's quickly reevaluate what we did. We basically started with the task trigger. We said after the record is inserted, handle activities after insert. We send the trigger.new information here. We came to this particular method, and then we fetched all the contact ID list, right? All the contact IDs who are associated with the task. Now, after that, after I got all the IDs, I queried all the contact records because I wanted to fetch the this number information field. And then I iterated over all my records and I incremented the value to 1 simply. So looks like I did not need a map after all. Okay, because every contact record that will come in here will need an increment, need one increment, right? So for each task I'd be incrementing my contact record to 1. Okay, there could be some level of inconsistency with this particular code. I'll tell you why. There might be a scenario, let's say there are 2 tasks. Let's try to figure out there is only one task that comes into the picture. Okay, so then for this loop will iterate once and this will see, okay, it is a contact ID, so this will add one contact record to this particular list, and then you will fetch the contact record here and then you will run this and you will increment the value to 1. But what if multiple records come? Let's see how the bulkification works and is our code sufficient enough to handle that. So let's say 2 records or rather 2 tasks are imported and they are associated to 2 different contacts. Okay, you come in here, you check all the records, so this loop will run twice, right? And this will see if the contact ID starts with 003, which will be true for both of them. This will have 2 different contact information. Sounds good? Now you'll fetch both the contacts through this particular contact record query, and then for each contact you will increment this particular field by 1, which also looks good. So for both the contacts, the number of tasks associated will be 1. It will not, it was null before, it will be 1. Now let's take an example where there are 2 tasks that have been created, they have been associated to the same contact, right? That's what I want to see if it works or not. So if there are 2 task records and they're assigned to, or rather the who ID is associated to the same contact, only one parent contact, okay, then this particular loop will run twice and this contact ID list will have only one value. Okay, but now see, if there are, if this contact ID list already contains the who ID, it cannot contain the same ID again. I will get duplicates, right? So in order to avoid duplicates, I can convert this list to a set that will only give me selected non-duplicate values, right? So I have now converted this to a set. What did this do? This clears out all the duplicates. So now this contact ID list will contain only one record, even though the task record came in twice, but both tasks point to the same contact. So my contact ID list will contain only one record. And for that one record, I'll query that record out here and then I'll increment it to 1. Now see, I cannot increment it to 1. I should be incrementing it to 2 because there are 2 task records, right? So in that case, our code fails, right? I have to figure out a way to understand what is the count for each contact and what is the number of tasks, and that count should be added. It should not just be 1. Did that make sense? The third use case. Hear it again. You have 2 task records coming in, both are assigned to the same contact. So this particular loop will run twice, but it will check if the, if this particular who ID starts with 003, which it does, it will add it to the list, right? And I've converted it to a set so that it does not contain duplicates, or else I'll get an exception, right? List exception. So I have converted this to a set. Now this contact ID list will contain one contact value for 2 task records, right? So this will give me that contact record information and it will give me the field value. And when I iterate over here, I'll get only one iteration because there's only one record in the system, and I'm simply checking if the number of tasks associated is not equal to null, I'm incrementing it by 1 or I'm assigning it 1. But there were 2 task records that had to come, right? So how do we handle that? We have to figure out a way to associate, or rather keep the count of the number of tasks per contact ID. Okay, so I have to do that also. So I can create a map. So I'll say con count map dot put. I can say task rec dot who ID, comma, this should be an integer value, right? So I'll create a map here. I'll say map of ID, comma, integer. We'll try to figure out. If it does not work, we'll change the map structure. Okay, I'm just trying to see if this works or not. So I'll say map of ID, comma, integer, and I'll say con count map, save. Now I want to populate this map. How do I populate it? Basically, I'm storing the who ID here. This would be the key and this will always be unique. So I want to keep incrementing the value here if the contact ID is same. So what I'll do is I'll say if con count map dot contains key. What is the key here? The key is task rec dot who ID. Okay. Now see, if con count map dot contains key is this particular section, but let's start from the very beginning. If normally the con count map will be empty in the very beginning, if it is empty, it will come in the else block for the very first time. When it comes to the else block, what we simply do is we'll just put con count map dot put task record dot who id, and we'll just put 1 here because that's the first task that has come. But what if it already contains the key? That means it has already entered this particular loop and it has found a task, and that's why it came here and it probably created one record for the who id and it added the value 1 to it. The integer was 1. But if it is coming here, that means it already contains the key, which means this is the second or probably the third task record that's coming in for the same contact, for the same who id. What I want to do is I'll say integer count var equals con count map dot get task rec dot who id plus 1. See what I did there? I am fetching whatever information is currently in the map and I'm fetching the integer information using the get method. So this will give me the current count that it already has. So let's say it has 1 right now. Okay, so this will give me 1, and then I'll say 1 plus 1 equal to 2. So now that I have my count variable, I'll simply say con count map dot put. I'll fetch the current id, which is task.who id, and I'll put the new integer count variable here. So that would be the updated count. Let's try to save this. Yeah, right. Now let's say the second task record comes in or the third one comes in. What will happen? The con count map dot contains key will evaluate to true. So that means the else condition will not run again. The if condition will run. And now it will say integer count var equal to give me whatever is the current count. This will now give you 2, and it will say 2 plus 1 is 3. And then you can again put con count map dot put. The same who id will be populated with the integer 3. And if there are multiple, it will keep on incrementing to 4, 5, 6 and 7. Right? So now your map is ready. Let's click on the save button one more time. And this map kind of holds for what contact information, how many count do you have, how many count of tasks do you have, right? And this is exactly the number we want to put on our number of task associated field, right? Now instead of assigning it here like this, what I can simply do is, if for each con record in con records list, if the number of tasks associated is not equal to null, this is the scenario wherein you might have already added a value, but else condition will only run for the very first time, so this can stay as 1. Okay, but this right here should be corrected. Now if con dot number of tasks associated is not equal to null, I want to say con dot number of tasks associated is equal to con count map dot get con dot id, right? So what I'm fetching the new counter variable that I got from the map, and I'll just add it with my current number of tasks associated that I have on my contact record. So this will add the remaining tasks that have come in this transaction with the current value that your record already holds. Make sense? So this will update your contact information. What about this else condition? Let's take a look at it one more time. So this is else con dot number of tasks associated equal to 1. When will this evaluate? This will only evaluate if you don't have any tasks that have been created, right? So 1 might not make sense. Why? Because you might have multiple task records that may come in the single transaction through an import or a mass import, right? What you'd want to do is you'll simply say, give me whatever is in the con count map and just put it here, right? So that number that has come with this transaction will be added or updated on the contact record. You don't have to increment it with any other value because there's no value to increment as the value is null. All right. So now this looks complete. So we did a lot of changes here, and that was based on how the requirement went, right? So first we thought we would simply say +1 and -1, but then we understood, okay, for bulk scenario, this will not work. So we have to find out a way to associate every contact record with the number of tasks that have come in the single transaction. And then what we did was we created a map. We associated the contact with the count. And how did we set the count? If the map did not contain a key, we simply said store it as 1. That means it is the first instance. But from after that, if there are 2, 3, 4, 5 records, we simply said give me whatever is in the value of the map key, add it to 1, and then put it on the map again. So we kept on updating the map. Once the map was updated, this map contained the list of keys wherein the key were the contact, and they contained the number of task records that have been assigned to them. And then we queried all of those contacts, right? And instead of querying it through contact ID list, I can now get rid of this list altogether, right? And I can get rid of this list also, and I'll say save. And instead of contact ID list, I can simply say con count map dot key set. I can use the key set because that is also list of contact IDs only, and I'll say save. Okay, and then we iterated over all the contact records that we fetched here, and for each of them we simply use the map to judge whether the count needs to be set or it needs to be incremented with the current value, right? So this was a good scenario that we worked on. Let's now test it out. Oh, I cannot use the update scenario. I have to use the insert scenario because I used the after insert event, right? Let's go to tasks and let's say new task, and here I'll associate it to user 1. It's a subject, email, and everything else is fine. Let's say save now. So this saved up fine, and now if I open user 1, let's see if the value incremented or not. So it tells me that the number of tasks associated have been set to 1, but it's not updating it here, if you notice. See, so we have done a blunder. What is the blunder? We were in the context of after insert, we updated the field value, but did we ever update the contact information? We did not. So we have to go ahead and do that. So I'll say con record to update dot add this con, basically this particular contact record, right? I'll come outside this for loop and I'll say if con record to update is not empty, go ahead and update the records. So once we do the update is when actually the things will reflect on the database, right? So I'll say update con record to update. This will give me an error because I do not have a list created yet. So that's a list of contact, new list of contact. This should be con record to update. Save. Okay, so I just checked the logs and I saw that the after insert activity was happening and it was trying to update the value to 1, but the problem was the value was not updated in the database because we did not write a DML command. Let's go back, let's go to the task and let's create a new one. I'll say add, let's do it from here. Say this should be assigned to user 1, assigned to Himanshu, status not started, save. Right, so now the task has been updated, and if you notice the number of tasks is added to 1, updated to 1. Cool. I might not be able to show you the bulk scenario, but you can also try importing some multiple task record and see if the functionality is working or not, right? And accordingly debug like what's happening inside. Cool. So that was a good use case that we did, use case 19. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.